You know, layers. When we're doing our embroidery, we usually do it on a flat, just single embroidery. But if we add it in layers, we can really add to the dimensionality and make something extra special. Here's a cool embroidery, and then the words are embroidered and they float on the top. Pretty cool, right? We can also layer our embroideries to create something maybe just a little bit more realistic. This tree has layers of different embroideries created in IQ Designer. We're going to be using the Altair today, IQ Designer, and we're going to be sewing something kind of over the top. I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk, and I'll see you in a minute. So now, we can take our embroidery and we can take it over the top. What I mean by that is we can do it in layers. So let me explain the two approaches I have for today. So now this is an embroidery, and you can see that the main embroidery is the really cool wolf. And then, but the words are not embroidered directly on this part of the embroidery that was done previously. They're embroidered on something that floats over the top. And this is a great way that you can add interest to your embroidery. Say you want to do an embroidery and you want to put something on top, you want to make it look like it's kind of three-dimensional. You're making a snow globe, and you're putting maybe some clear vinyl over the top to make it look like a snow globe. Put it over the top of that other embroidery. So we can explore that a little bit today. And the other thing I want to talk to you about is using IQ Designer in a way we haven't used it quite yet in Sewing Tech Talk before, is to create something that's kind of realistic. I'm going to be using the paintbrush tool in IQ Designer, and this entire tree was done that way, even the little trunk down here. So you kind of get to finger paint a little bit, and this is just layers of stipple. I'm also going to create something that's going to go over the top to give it even more dimensionality. So imagine you're making a landscape quilt. Then I could do clouds on a layer that goes over the top. That would be exciting. I'm going to put extra pieces of foliage on here. There's all kinds of flowers floating over the top of a hill. All kinds of different ways I can use it to create some extra dimension, and quite frankly making it a little bit more realistic. So now let's get to putting some extra foliage on the top of this tree, and I'll also show you how I did the tree, and we'll talk a little bit more about doing the lettering on top of a sheer fabric. So there's lots of things to cover. So now let's dive into IQ Designer after I tell you a little bit more about the materials that I'm going to use. Obviously, if we're putting a layer on the top, we want something kind of sheer, right? So there's all kinds of different sheer fabrics that you can use. There is just like organza in different colors. This one's pretty wild. It's flame. You know, when it's Halloween time, when you go into the big box fabric stores, you can get some pretty wild fabrics that you don't necessarily have to use for a Halloween costume. This one's kind of fun. It's just a really sparkly. Now, talking about sewing on shears, what we can do is we can use this technique to create like a lace effect. So by sewing on top of the sheer fabrics, we really can make a layer. Let me show you this. That is, oops, here it comes. That is a lace. Now you see this little journal, right? This embroidery or lace on the side is done with a built-in fill from IQ Designer. It's stitched on a netting and put over the top of velvet and then stitched down with a decorative stitch. It's really quite pretty. Now this particular effect, making a lace using netting, you know, netting really needs to have, lace really needs to have a base. If you just sew it on some like wash away stabilizer, which we're going to do, the thread needs a bridge to hold together, and netting can provide that. So for example, here's a pretty design that's really not meant to be a lace, but by stitching it on top of the netting, you really get that lace effect. So this was done that technique, and you can use this technique for that too. So layered on the top of something, create your own lace, or what the heck, you can create your own fabric too maybe a wedding dress is in your future, who knows? Oh, wouldn't that sparkly stuff be pretty made into a lace for like a wedding gown? So there's lots of different opportunities. So let's get to stitching with our layered over the top project. Okay, so one other thing I want to tell you about is when you're thinking about the base layer, one thing about the base layer, this is pretty bright fabric, but by layering anything over the top, what it does is it dulls that bottom layer. So when you're considering doing this technique, think about having the bottom layer maybe a little bit brighter or a little bit more saturated of colors than you're kind of used to doing. And let's get to IQ Designer and start to create some extra foliage for my little tree. Now, like I said, in IQ Designer, we're going to be using that paintbrush that we haven't used before. So let's go onto the machine and let's open up IQ Designer and get some fun going. So on the Baby Lock Altair, I have my tape here getting ready to put that lace on, that netting on. Here I am. I'm going to go to IQ Designer. Now, if you have a brother machine, it's going to be called My Design Center. Now, here's the workspace for the IQ Designer. And you can see this light gray line right through here. Well, what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be working with a 4x4 hoop. Now this hoop, it may be the standard hoop for you for your machine. It may be an optional hoop. I'm going to be doing something kind of small, so I am using the 4x4 hoop today. But I want to design within this space. So let me show you how I can make a kind of a little visual reminder for me what the 4x4 hoop looks like. So when I go into the workspace, I want a 4x4, something that gives me some indication of where that is. If I go up into the settings, I can choose the frame size, which is the size of the hoop. And I can go to the 4x4, and that's going to give me some sort of indication how big my space is. Obviously the Altair has a really big, large hoop, and I'm going to be designing right in this small area. So now, here we are. Now, like I said, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be designing within this area, but I'm going to be designing with something, and I'm going to be finger painting, but I'm going to be using that paintbrush icon. To select that, where you go is the Region Properties area, and you can choose from filled in, you can choose a stipple, or you can choose any one of these really pretty different fill patterns. And you can use these as well. But I'm just going to work with a stipple right now. There's my stipple, and I'm going to make some foliage. So let's make it a darker green so that you can see that. Now, while I'm here, before I leave, up here at the very top, I have this, I can decide how big and what shape my paintbrush is. I'm going to be going with probably the big one, even though I have a small space. I could choose any one of these, and we might do that a little bit later on. So, okay. Now, when I touch the little paintbrush and I touch the screen, I'm going to be finger painting, and I just want a random shape to fill that stippling in. So here I go. I just want to make it look foliage-like. Whew, there we are. That wasn't very stressful at all. Now, that's just a representation. Let's see what that looks like. When I go next, I can tell the machine how big I want this stipple to be and how far apart I want the different stipple areas. So let's go a little small. Let's take it down a little small. And I don't think I want a distance away from anything. I'm ready to go with the way it is. Let's hit set. Now remember, I can change my mind. Let's hit preview and see what that looks like. There's my fun little stipple. Well, it doesn't look like much maybe on the screen, but when I stitch it and put it on top of my tree, it might be something a little bit better. And I'm going to show you how we can take this and kind of magnify it as we do layers. But I think I need that just a little bit smaller, so it's easy to return and take that distance down. Let's take it down pretty small. Set and preview. that's a little bit more intense, and that's kind of what I'm shooting for. Okay, now here's the other thing. I'm going to make a whole bunch of these different times, different shapes, but I can put this into the memory of IQ Designer, and when I come back I won't have to do so many changes to it. So let's hit set and send it to the land of embroidery. Now there it is, and now I'm going to be stitching it on. I have a piece of netting. Now this netting has really large holes. I hope you can see that it has a pretty big holes. And I've also layered it with some wash away stabilizer. So here's the good news. When you're doing this type of technique, this is not couture embroidery. This is something I'm going to cut out and place on the top of something. So you can actually mend and use different pieces of your wash away stabilizer from maybe around the embroidery design when you've created it, something around the extra edge. Kind of hate to waste that, so you absolutely can layer it up. Now one thing I'm going to caution you though is I have the netting over the top because I don't want the different seam, I don't want the embroidery foot being caught under this overlap of this wash away stabilizer. So that's one thing to think about. Now for this I'm going to put an extra layer of some smaller netting on the top, and that gives me the smaller hole size that I think is going to work. So oh, I touched the screen and I changed the color. Oh, now that I think about it, this is a great time to use up all your little scraps of thread. Variegated thread works great here. So remember, you're going to have all kinds of different layers, make them all different colors, and you'll get that 3D effect. So let's get started and let's embroider this. I have some green in the top. Oh, and put a matching thread in the bobbin, because with this sheer fabric, you're going to see the back side of it anyway. So let me get my little hoop on here. Let me put my extra little piece on. Now, I have another one here. Hold on, I dropped it. And I don't want it to scoot around too terribly much, so I'm going to put it on there. And I'm going to put some little pieces of tape to make sure I've held it down. So if you've been counting, what I have is I have my wash away stabilizer. I have this big open weave netting, which is very inexpensive by the way, and I have this smaller piece. Now, if I'm doing foliage, this would be great if it was like a green or say some like fall color, some kind of gold or some sort of orange. You can really do some really cool effects by altering the color of your netting or your overlay. I could even come in and put something like that on, and that would really give me the autumn effect. So let's get started. So I'm going to go on to embroidery. And let's see, I think I might be pretty much ready to go. This tape might be in the way. Ooh, let me check. So I'm going to go to my trial key and I'm going to go to the different parts of the design to see where I need to have put the tape. That's going to be pretty safe. Let's come down to the bottom. Oh, and that's safe too. I nailed it. Let's put that down there to hold that down. And of course I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it as it goes. So now I'm ready to get started. I'm going to do this stipple, and when we come back, we're going to put another stipple on the top of it. Okay, so I finished that little design on the netting, and I admit it doesn't look like much, but remember, it's going to go in layers on top of my little tree here to give me a little bit more realistic of a tree. Now, the one thing that gives you extra layers, extra dimension, extra look of real foliage is having different layers on the top. Now, I have this one little design that I just did with milliseconds with swiping that IQ Designer workspace with my finger. But I can take this one thing that I made and I can make it a little bit more. Because when I create a design in IQ Designer, it's a regular embroidery. And I have all the different functions that I have with any other embroidery. I can use all the different edit functions. I can make it smaller. I can mirror image it, I could rotate it, I can do all kinds of changes to it. And what happens when, let's just say when I change the size, it's a certain size stipple, but when I reduce the size of it, it's going to land, the stitching is going to land in different parts of it and create something that's really kind of cool. So let's do a couple modifications to this one design in Edit and see if we can get another layer to get some more over-the-top embroidery. So here's my little design right now. What I can do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to go to return, so I have more controls in the embroidery edit screen. When I bring down edit, I can use any one of these different cool different functions. I can mirror image it, I can rotate it, I can change the size. If I even just take the move key and move it just a little bit over, what's going to happen is those different stipples are going to land in a completely different spot. So we did a little bit of a move. Let's take a little bit of the size down. There we go. And let's do a little tiny little bit rotation. There we go. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to stitch this right on the top of the other piece that I just did, and it's going to hit little different areas. What I really should do is probably change the color and put a different color thread in, and it's going to give me all that kind of, well, you know what foliage looks like. There's dark parts and light parts. This is really going to look cool. I'm going to stay with the same thread color right now. Remember, I can do as many layers really as I want. So let's stitch this one and see what that looks like. So I finished my little piece of foliage. Now remember, I didn't modify it too much. I just scooted it over a tiny bit and I made it a tiny bit smaller. You can do a whole bunch more editing to get a really different effect. So now let me tell you what the next step is. So here it is. And at least by doing the second layer, it made it a little bit darker. And remember, you could also use some heavier, thicker thread as well. The creativity options are almost endless. I bet you guys are out there going to probably be making some landscape quilts. Now, how do I make this go on my project? Well, what I did is I washed it on that wash away stabilizer. Remember, I used a bunch of scraps of it and I kind of layered it up. When you're doing some kind of a project like this, use the wash away stabilizer that's going to fit for the amount of stitches that you're going to be using. So if this was a very dense design, well then I would have needed maybe 2 layers of wash away stabilizer. So read the instructions from the manufacturer for whatever stabilizer that you're going to use. Wash away stabilizer also comes with a tacky, and what would be great would be to put that on there with the tacky side up, and that way I could lay my netting on there and that would be great. So now what I'm going to do is take this and actually with wash away stabilizer, what you want to do is you want to wash it away with some warm water. Now this is not going to be a big deal because there's not very many layers here. It's not very thick. But if it was a thicker design that I'm going to be doing, say I'm making that lace design, you might want to soak it in some warm water even overnight because it's going to get this wash away stabilizer out from under the threads and away. Now, if you don't wash all the stabilizer out, what happens is it stays kind of stiff. Maybe not this so much because it has netting, because there's not that much thread there to stay stiff. But you could use that if you wanted to. Say I'm doing something and I wanted something even more three-dimensional and this was stiff. Well, say I'm making a cloud. I could make it that much more puffy. So what I'm going to do is let's cut away this. Yes, I'm supposed to wash it away, but I want to show you what the effect looks like. And in fact, when you're washing away the stabilizer, you want to cut away as much as possible anyway. So let's cut off some of this outside extra edge. And let me show you what it's going to kind of look like on my tree. And then I want to show you some fun ideas for using this kind of technique, even if you're not layering. So it's roughly cut out. Yes, I'd cut it out a little bit better unless I didn't want to. So let's lay it on my tree here and see what that looks like. So here's my tree. And here's my extra little piece. And remember, this stabilizer is going to go away. But can you see how this is going to kind of actually give me extra dimension and extra different? Oh, it's going to make it look like a real tree, I think. I used some variegated thread here, and here I did that same technique of painting. I'll show you how to do that to make the tree trunk, and I just did it with a fill stitch. So you can see a whole bunch of these. Well, they could give you, like I said, a dimensional tree. But what if you created something like this and said you wanted to do a family tree? You could do leaves with lettering on them and do that as either an applique or even a three-dimensional leaf on the top of this tree with like a family tree, which would be kind of fun. Lettering, if you're going to do lettering on the top of a netting, make sure that the lettering is not too dense, and make sure the lettering doesn't have very many super fine points. So this lettering is built into the Altair. It worked great. Coming in here was a little bit fine, but it really stands out, and I think it looks great on top of my little project here. So if you're going to do lettering, great. Same process. Now I have a handout for this in all my different videos, and it talks about all these different ways. The layering of the different stipples, the doing lettering on the top of the netting or the sheer fabrics, and the things you have to think about when you're doing this. So now, let me show you some fun ideas that I think would be great. I'm going to use IQ Designer. We may not stitch them, but my job is to give you some ideas. So let's go back to IQ Designer and let me show you some fun stuff. So, I'm going to actually save this into the memory of the machine so I can come back and do some other stuff. But let's go back to IQ Designer and let me show you some fun different ideas. I just need time to stitch all these. So I thought maybe about making a sunset. Wouldn't that be fun? So let's see what that would look like. So let's come on in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an invisible boundary. So I'm going to touch my shapes. I'm going to get a square. I actually want just the inside part of it. Okay, now there it is in a fill stitch. Of course I don't want that, but let's make it wider. Super. Okay. Now, I want to take this and I'm going to move it up to the very top. And I'm going to make this into a stipple. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to go into my region properties. I'm going to pick the stipple. Now let's pick this is sunset-y kind of color. I'm going to make a sunset. So, okay. And when I touch the bucket and I touch that, it becomes that type of stipple. Now, I want the bottom of it to kind of blend, but I want another one of these too. So while we're here, let's take and let's select it all, or part of it at least. Let's copy that, and then let's move it down. The move keys are under the size. And let's move it over. Now, I like that, but I want it to be the sunset. Oh, I think this one might need to be lighter. So let's change that, make it more yellowy. And I touch the bucket and I touch that. Now I want these edges to be kind of, well, I want them to be kind of blendy. So let's come on in. Let's use our same paintbrush, or we could use our eraser. And we're going to brush with no-sew. Or we could also use our eraser. We're going to come in and make the bottom of this kind of goofy. I know it doesn't look like much now, but I promise you we're going to have some fun here. Okay, that looks strange. I think I'm good. Let's hit next. And I'm going to leave it the way it is. And let's hit preview and see what we got. Now look what I have. I have all kinds of different yellow up here, red down here. I think I might need orange in the middle. Well, that's great. Let's hit set. Okay, let's hit add. IQ Designer, and let's create a box in the middle there again. I need another box. Okay, let's make it, whoops, let's make it bigger. Okay, let's make it into a stipple. Ah, is that the orange in the middle? Let's see. Okay, now this time I want to make the edges goofy. Let's use the eraser this time. Same idea. I just want the edges not to be a straight line. Okay, I hope you see where I'm going with this. Oh, don't forget, we got to make it into a stipple. Now, see how it picked up just that one part? I want everything. So by touching this little link here, I have everything that's that same kind. It turns out that these happen to be little parts that are just that intense fill stitch. So, no problem. What we're going to do is touch this, make that into a stipple. Okay, now it's a stipple too. See how you can go in and change? If you think you missed something, it's super easy to do in IQ Designer. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Well, it doesn't look like much, but let's send it to the land of embroidery. Oh, there it is. Let's move it up a little bit, and I hope you can see what I'm shooting for. See how I have my embroidery space and it goes from yellow to orange to red? And it's going to give me that great graduated effect. So I could use this in any kind of embroidery that I have. If I'm doing something tropical and I want a sunset behind it, you could do all kinds of fun stuff with this. Now, I told you I was going to do that tree trunk. It's the same process. Let's go and add this to IQ Designer. Maybe we can make a palm tree. So, add IQ Designer. Now I'm still going to do the drawing with the paintbrush, but let's make it into a palm tree. There's my brown, and I want the regular old fill stitch, and let's just draw our palm tree. And I'm going to need some leaves. Of course, I take my time, but let's see what this looks like when we put it on top of our sunset. Next, there's that. There's my little bit there. There's my trunk. Different little parts of it. See how it's picking up all the different areas, but when I hit that, it picks up everything. Let's see what it looks like on my sunset. Set. I hope you like it. It's a palm tree in the sunset. Now, of course, you'd take your time, but wouldn't it be kind of fun just to finger paint something? This would also be a great way to get kids excited about doing an embroidery. They can finger paint on the screen, and then you can just stitch it out. So, whole kinds of ideas to layer stuff up. I hope you enjoyed creating some over-the-top embroidery. And don't forget, you're not stuck with just the one. You can put stuff on the top. I'm going to send it off to George. He's going to tell you a little bit about the Baby Lock Altair. Thanks for joining me, and I want you to go out there and do something that's really spectacular and, needless to say, over the top.
Thanks, Cathy. As usual, that was an incredible presentation. The Baby Lock Altair is dollar for dollar the most advanced machine in the industry. It has a large 9.5 by 14 inch embroidery area, plus 494 built-in beautiful designs, 30 of the most amazing fonts that you can arc and ray and edit, plus many large, beautiful monograms. You have the ability to create a design without a computer. With the IQ Designer, you can take an image from a phone, send it to the machine, and it turns into beautiful embroidery instantly. You also have an automatic applique creator to create great borders around names and other embroidery designs. Plus, of course, we love our never miss needle threader, and it also cuts all the jump stitches that you want. Now, it's not just for embroidery. This is an incredible machine with 11.25-inch opening. It also has a automatic fabric sensor. This fabric sensor senses heavy fabric like denim and sews automatically. From there, it will also sew on lighter fabric like tricot. It will sew elastic. It's incredible. Now, for the real difficult fabric and for quilting, it has a digital dual feed with a belt system that controls all fabrics perfectly. It also has a laser guide, so you can guide it for that perfect seam allowance. It's incredible. As I mentioned, this is dollar for dollar the most advanced machine in the industry. We have a special package right now. The total package value is $14,999, but we have it on sale for $8,999. We're offering free shipping across the country, as well as we have interest-free payments of under $188 a month. But that's not all. We have a special bonus for a limited time, and while supplies last, we're including 63 spools of beautiful embroidery thread. We're including stabilizer, all kinds of needles, bobbins, and a membership to Love of Knowledge. We're here, you're going to see all kinds of demonstrations and techniques on the Baby Lock Altair and other sewing techniques. This is for a limited time, but I also mentioned we have interest-free payments. Now, for those who don't want to finance, we have even a better bonus. So give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 or click on the link to order today. Bye for now.